Okay. I think all of you are back, so I'll resume. I mentioned that Copernicus was opposing Ptolemy. Ptolemy's view of the universe was set by an Egyptian pharaoh named Ptolemy, who lived in the 200s. Ptolemy was a follower of Alexander the Great. Ptolemy's views were followed by all Western men, and mostly Eastern men too, for 1,800 years. Now, I bring that up to point out that some students will say, oh, don't 90% or 95 or 96% of your scientists believe in man-made global warming? Folks, that's politics. Not necessarily science. It's politics. The fact that 90 to 96, 97% of people believe may not prove to have anything to do with whether or not the idea is correct. And in the case of Ptolemy's view of the universe, as far as we know, 100% of the scientists down through the ages believed in that. It was simply incorrect. All right. There were some women who also became scientists. Margaret Cavendish was one. Maria Winkelmann discovered a comet. But both of these women, I'm not going to write her name, but I do want to mention them. Cavendish was not allowed to join the Royal Society because she was a woman. And Winkelmann was not given a post at the Berlin Academy. Again, same reason, she was a woman. Both of these women, had they been men, would probably have been honored, given posts, or been allowed to join the higher level scientific societies, but they were not. Now, a lot of folk believe that the breakthroughs in science, particularly astronomy and medicine, and later we'll learn that there are other science fields have also broke through, but the way was paved by the Reformation. And what we're going to find out is almost all of the scientific breakthroughs that occurred within the confines of what we call Western civilization. You might even say, and I'm going to get a little bold here, you might even say within Christendom. Until recently, hardly any of these inventions and discoveries were made outside of the realm of what we call Christendom. Most of them were made either in the United States or in Western Europe. Now, for a time, the Russians claimed that they invented the airplane, that they invented the automobile, that they invented the telephone. And here I'm going to quote my dad. My dad said they claimed that they invented the telephone, and they had never invented nothing. Pardon the grammar. It's my dad's, not mine. Anyway, there's the good. Now, that's not as true as it was. Now, again, what I'm saying here does not apply to the 21st century, because China is really trying, and China is making a lot of discoveries. But again, I spent an hour one time after class talking with a young man. It was a Friday class. He was all disturbed at how that Christianity had hindered the development of science. I said, wait a minute. In China, their philosophers stopped the development of science cold. And the Islamic world, their clerics stopped it cold. In Christianity, they hindered. The church opposed Copernicus. The church opposed Galileo. But by the time Newton came around, the church was open. The church was friendly. Again, the church opposed, yes, but did not stop. There is a difference, folk, a big difference. All right. Now we move from there to from science to philosophy. Science to philosophy. Yeah, I'll start off with René Descartes. Descartes Now, it's not spelled the way it's pronounced. Rene Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." He said that we should only believe what reason said was true. And he believed that the scientific method could be used to prove anything. Now I'm going to evaluate these statements a little bit. First of all, the one, because I think, therefore I exist. I mean, I can't question that. Just about 5 years ago, in 2014, there was a debate between Ken Ham and Mr. Nye. Some of you might have seen it, maybe none of you did, but the big highlight for the debate was when the narrator asked both men, what do you think to be the origin of consciousness? And Mr. Nye said, we don't know what the origin of consciousness is, but consciousness exists, but it can't be weighed, it can't be measured. But it's obvious it exists. It really can't even be defined. What is consciousness? My computer, I don't think, has it. Even though now there's now saying they're making computers that might actually have something that is the equivalent of consciousness, but a computer that you can talk to and it can talk back, and it's not even a digital computer. It uses what they call quanta, but that's another story. But anyway, Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Now, the idea that everything in the universe is rational and can be proven rationally, there are some things like, for instance, consciousness, which cannot be weighed, cannot be measured, and cannot be proven rationally. There's, but they believe, oh yeah, the scientific method will explain everything. Now, I guarantee that all those of you who have sat in the same classroom and listened to the same instructor will not all of you get the same right answers on the same test or the same wrong answers. It won't happen. So human beings do not lend themselves completely to the scientific method. The scientific method has its limitations. The scientific method cannot explain things like love and hate, or even consciousness, or even existence. Nevertheless, at least mankind was thinking. Science can only go so far. Francis Bacon. There were two famous scientists named Bacon, Roger Bacon and Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon was an Englishman. He set up the scientific method. He said that we should only believe what we can prove. And he made fun of the people of his day who were trying to believe that every bit of knowledge was contained in books. And one day they got into a debate on how many teeth are in a horse's mouth. And this is one of his famous stories. And one person paged Aristotle and couldn't find the answer. Another person paged Plato. Another person paged Homer. And finally a young scholar who didn't know where said, "Hey, there's a horse outside. I see a horse outside the window. Why don't you go outside, open its mouth and count its teeth?" The other scholars kicked him out of the room. "Hey, that's not our method out here. We don't use that method here." And they kicked him out. Eventually the scholars decided that since they couldn't find in the books how many teeth a horse had, that question could never be answered. And they ended the debate as an unknowable, unverifiable answer. Again, Francis Bacon was poking fun. But he pointed out that oftentimes we only use data that proves our point. And this I see a lot in the science, this controversy about man-made global warming. They'll use the data that proves their point. And they forget that the hottest year we have on record is 1934. I wasn't even around then. The second hottest was 1998. But they only use data that proves their point, and any data that doesn't prove a point. So Francis Bacon said that if you really have an idea, the thing to do is not set out to prove it, but set out to disprove it. And if you can't disprove it, then you believe it. But you only believe what you can't disprove. His ideas were used for some 300 years in two areas, science and law. Eventually it was abandoned. the Bacon scientific method. And if you look up Bacon, they spend half the article, at least last article, telling you why his method, while it sounds so good, it will not work. For instance, when you study quantum science, in the quantum physics, a quantum particle can be here and all of a sudden be here without ever having been anywhere in between. Again, this is not Newtonian science. And in quantum science, if you shoot a beam of light here and shoot another one here, and if this beam of light, if it turns red out here, the same beam will turn red the same distance out here. I mean, how many of you have heard what I'm saying? The quantum particles will behave one way when they're being observed, and they'll behave differently when they think they're not being observed. Again, have any of you heard this outside of, no, you haven't? One of you, yeah, a couple of you have, yeah, a couple of you have. Well, again, I want you to know, folks, do the research if you're curious. I'm not making it up. This is actually known to be the case. So that's one reason why the quantum was eventually abandoned. Now, another reason why quantum is still with it. Why that Bacon's method was eventually abandoned. Another reason was in 1859, Darwin published his theory of evolution. And if you really apply Bacon's method to evolution, you cannot believe in evolution. That I'm going to talk about. I'm going to save that for a little ways down the road when I come to Darwin. All right, Darwin. So much for him right now. Well, Bacon believed that science could be used to conquer nature, that we should exploit nature to its fullest. Well, this has brought Bacon into conflict with 21st century environmentalists. Now, the book that this school uses for its American history, called The American Promise, they'll tell you that Eisenhower built the interstate system. The interstate, and if you get on an interstate, in a lot of places you'll see Eisenhower Interstate, and you see 5 stars because he was a 5-star general. Some of you are looking at me like you know what I'm talking about. He had Eisenhower 5 stars on his collar. 5 stars. But later he became president, and he'd seen the interstates built by Adolf Hitler. So he said this was the work. I said when he became president, he signed the bill into law to build the interstate system. Here's what your book says. It led to environmental pollution. In other words, everything that mankind does is wrong. The Industrial Revolution, even lighting this room, we're putting chemicals in the environment that we don't need to use gasoline to power your car is. Now, hey, I don't believe this, folks.
Wait, what?
You put out, go ahead.
You don't believe in like putting gasoline in cars?
No, because you burn the gas, it puts out carbon dioxide, which makes the plants grow. And if you look at the plant life today, it is thriving. Go ahead.
But you do it though, right? Because you drive.
Oh, I burn gasoline because, well, see, for one, let me tell you, when I was a kid, we had 1/10 of the cars we have today. 1/10, and the air we're breathing today is cleaner. You used to could go to downtown Atlanta, and they had bush fuel, and you couldn't breathe. I was in downtown Atlanta yesterday, and I could breathe.
Okay.
The cars today are much, much cleaner. I mean, super cleaner than they were 40 and 50 years ago. Those cars, I mean, they put out smoke like today. If you see a car putting out smoke, you know there's something seriously wrong with it. And the police would put that car off the road.
I bet you would love a Tesla.
Huh?
I bet you would love a Tesla.
Oh, it's what?
A Tesla.
Yeah, oh yeah, I mean, I used to like the idea of electric cars. But, I mean, I thought the electric cars would be great. But I don't now because they make gasoline engines much better. And they are clean. They are, but you can't get an electric car to go 500 miles on a charge. You simply can't. And the charge takes hours. So, I mean, I have relatives who live in near Middletown, Ohio, where they're having a lot of storms right now. And I hope to go see them. And today, my oldest daughter wants to look at Disney World. She's moving to Orlando today. I want to go see her. For both trips, 500 miles south of Orlando. You can't do that with an electric car. I mean, you can stop and find a charger somewhere and spend 7 or 8 hours charging, and then go on. Yeah, I mean, really, that's true. 7 or 8 hours charge. See, the idea is you charge them overnight. Yeah. So that turned me off from electric cars.
But if you're gonna own an electric car, California would be like the best.
Now that is something else. Now, if you live in California, again, and by the way, a lot of the pollution you see in California is actually coming all the way across the Pacific in China. My 2 daughters and a wife have been to China. You cannot breathe the air.
Don't they like sell bottled air or something like that?
I've heard that, and they also sell gas masks.
Wow, why is air for sale?
Yeah, see, you can't breathe the air.
It's
But
all-
again,
It's all caused by
it's what?
it's mainly caused by industrialization because the pollution that factory put out is far more serious than the.
Well, see, we had the same problem. With Pittsburgh, for instance, Pennsylvania, where I have roots in, used to be what's called the Smoky City. I mean, in Pittsburgh, it turned white houses black. And the breathing of the air was awful. But today, the federal government in the state of Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh passed its anti-smoke laws. And they guarantee that the factories still are there, and they put out the heat, but they don't put out the smoke. The smoke goes through filters that change the air into good breathable air, and it's clean. And you can now go to downtown Pittsburgh, you can breathe the air. In China, they're behind on this, I understand. They'll have to catch up because otherwise they're going to die of pollution. They'll have to catch up. All right, anyway, but the point I was making is, in modern day environmentalists would come into conflict with Bacon because Bacon believed that we should exploit nature to its fullest. Again, time will tell how much he was right and how much he was wrong. Now, the people got together and formed the English Royal Society or the French Royal Academy of Sciences, and these academies were dedicated to invention of new machineries. And at first there's 2 types of science, the practical and the theoretical. The practical is putting together better gadgets. That's practical science. And then the theoretical is, how is the universe held together? How did the universe begin? What makes the universe tick? The theoretical. But some people don't like the word theoretical anymore because it means that you haven't proven it. You can only guess, so they use different words. But there's 2 types of sciences, so and one of them is the practical side. But these men would get together in their meetings and they would discuss, first they discussed how to put together like a better steam engine, make a steam engine work better. And then they started working on the theoretical side. Now I want to say this about theoretical science, folks. Now maybe it's changed, but they used to, you don't even ask which direction does the current flow on a battery. Does it flow from positive to negative or negative to positive? We thought we knew at one point that it went from negative to positive. Then came the invention of the transistor and it told us that we didn't know. Today, we've been told don't even ask. We don't really know which direction the direct current flow is from flowing from a battery to a device and back to the battery again. Basic simple stuff that we can't answer. So what we do, we just put the gadgets together without knowing how they work. If you try to define gravity, I mean, yeah, Newton's law of gravity, we don't know what gravity is. We don't know how to create it. It's there. Maybe someday we can use electricity to create gravity. Now, moving from science for a while to art, and one of my daughters majored in art at UGA. The art at the time oftentimes featured human beings in a state of suffering and confusion, or it showed distorted people in a state of agony. It was not aimed for realism. Now, realism became less and less a feature of art, especially with the invention of the camera. And now the saying is, leave realism to the camera. Today's artists are to try to paint moods, to try to paint disasters, paint feelings. The theater, I do want you to remember this name. The theater Shakespeare. Now, let's see. Yeah, Shakespeare. Shakespeare's plays are still put on. I've seen 2 or 3 of them myself. I saw Romeo and Juliet. I saw King Lear. And let's see, seemed like a few others that I remember it, but I can't think of the name of it right now. But anyway, I've seen a couple of his plays. He used a style of English that isn't used that much anymore. But now, let me ask you, most of you look like you've been in high school recently. Do American high schools still require that you read one Shakespeare play?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And in my case, it was, oh yeah, Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth. Yeah, Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth were the 2 we read. And I read Romeo and Juliet in my sophomore year and Macbeth my junior year. I still remember them. Which ones did you read?
Those ones.
What's that? Those 2? Yeah. And how about you?
Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Hamlet.
Okay.
Yeah, Romeo and Juliet.
Well, Romeo and Juliet, I guess, is still the main one.
Yeah, that's the main one.
It's called a tragedy. Again, the word tragedy, when applied to plays and literature, is a story where the hero dies. The hero, in this case, both of the heroes were Romeo and Juliet, and they both died. Yeah, tragic. Tragedy. But Shakespeare's plays are still put on. And most of them have been put on DVDs now, or one time, well, when my daughter studied them, she studied them with a VHS player, but all of you think now know the VHS tape player is obsolete. And we don't use it anymore. We actually, our house, we have a working VHS player.
I still have one too.
Yeah, good. Hey, good for you. I have one, and we have some old VHS. I've converted most of my old VHS tapes to digital, digitized them, and I think that was a really smart move. The VHS tape will fade after a few years. Now, oh yeah, another famous work from the time is Don Quixote. Don Quixote was written by a Spanish man named Cervantes. Don Quixote was a knight after knights were obsolete, but he read a lot of books about knights, and he went around trying to tilt with windmills, knock over windmills. He went crazy. The purpose was to laugh knights and knights in armor out of existence. As the longbow was invented and the crossbow was invented, armor became less and less useful. If you know the crossbow, a crossbow is so difficult to bend, you have to mechanically cock it, but you can aim it, and when it shoots really. Now, how many of you are familiar with crossbows? And 1 or 2. Okay, when they shoot, it's for keeps. And the longbow is 6 foot long. It did not hit with the force of a crossbow, but it could penetrate an armor, and it could penetrate a knight's shield. But especially now with gunpowder, when gunpowder exploded, that made knights in armor obsolete. And then Don Quixote came along and laughed them out of existence. All right. Now, inevitably, science came into conflict with theology. This was true among the Chinese. This was true among the Islamic people, and true among the Christians. Science and theology came into conflict. A man named Pascal tried to keep them together, tried to unite science and theology. I'm not going to write his name down. But Pascal made a bet on the existence of God. He said, if God exists, we win everything. And if he doesn't exist, we lose nothing. So he said, I'm going to believe in God. And if he proves that he doesn't exist, I will have lost nothing. He said the life of a believer is more high quality in the life of a non-believer. Again, each of you can make up your mind what you think about this. But he said it just simply was not worth it to live a life thinking that when we die, that's it, that's nothing. So it helps to believe in an afterlife, whether there winds up being one or not. I mean, this was Pascal. But he could not reconcile science and Christianity. In the short run, people remained committed to their religion. Now, folk, I've got to say, in the long run, interest in Christianity waned as science seemed to explain away Christianity. Where are some areas of conflict? Well, one area of conflict is on origins. Science now tells us that man evolved over millions of years. The Bible says that man was created. Again, each of you have to make up your mind for yourself. And a lesson or two I'm going to try to point out that evolution as taught by Darwin is virtually impossible in view of things that Darwin did not understand, did not know about. Darwin did not know the existence of DNA, much less the role DNA plays in inheritance. If he had known, I don't know what it would have done, but something else. I'll say this now. Darwin believed that the first race to come on the scene was the black race, and the black race was therefore inferior. I mean, this was his belief now. And then the highest race was the white race. Well, some missionary went to him and said, Mr. Darwin, I have worked among African people, and I believe that they're every bit as intelligent as we Europeans. Darwin said, I hope you have not upset my theory. If it were true that all humans were of equal intelligence, it would put a huge gap between man and the animals, which it does. A huge gap. That can't be real. Anyway, that Darwin will come later. We're still in the 1700s. Darwin, 1859. All right. All right, we come down to the period of time called the Enlightenment. You know, we had a period called the Renaissance, the Reformation. Now we're going to come to a period of time called the Enlightenment. Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was where that religion, and particularly Christianity, was questioned in favor of rationalism, in favor of science, in favor of logic, what we could deduce by reasoning. One big difference with the Enlightenment was what Francis Bacon said. People before the Enlightenment had depended on other people to set the direction of their thinking. For instance, like these scholars who debated on how many teeth a horse were in a horse's mouth, they would get the answer by paging older works, and if they couldn't find it in the pages of the old works, well, forget it, it can't be solved. The idea of going out, opening the mouth of a horse and counting his teeth, by the way, you may or may not know, you can tell the age of a horse by looking at its teeth. I don't know how to do it.
Wait, like that's actually a proven fact?
It's pretty much, yeah. I mean, you want to, I mean, people who really know horses, they know whether they're buying an old horse or a young one by opening their mouth and looking at the teeth. And I don't know what they're looking at, but they claim that they can tell within a year or two how old a horse is by its teeth.
So,
Anyway, I don't have any answers, but I know that this is done for generations. Go ahead.
that's kind of interesting.
It is, yeah, it is. But, all right. Supposedly, I mean, they believe it. Anyway, with the Enlightenment, people began to feel like we need to escape the shackles the past has placed on us and start looking to nature itself or looking around us. Or like Francis, let's open the horse's mouth. Or it becomes a famous saying, get it straight from the horse's mouth. That goes back, yeah, hear it straight from the horse's mouth. Yes, in other words, did he really, so-and-so really say that? Oh, I heard it straight from the horse's mouth. Now, they believed that people needed to free themselves from the past, and especially they believed that man needed to question religion because they believed that religion held them back. And they hoped that mankind would be able to pass on a better society than the one they inherited. That's the Enlightenment. Now, out of the Enlightenment came the concept of rights.